Well, we've come to the end of the stories of life on the radio. This is day 31. I said I would do the entire month of March, one per day. And I really hope you've enjoyed these stories. There are many more, and which is what I want to touch on today. There's probably about 10 or 15 stories that maybe could have been full episodes, but maybe not. And I kind of just want to touch on more. Some are lighter, some are not. Cover a few other things, but this being the last day, I want to do a little reflection with family and that kind of thing as well, and just touch on some stories that um, I remembered so much and meant so much, but maybe not as much as some of the other stories. And then this will be the last of it. Then we'll be back to interesting people with Bob Brill and the interviews that I'll do, which I plan to pick up again very shortly. So hope you enjoy these, but they'll be there for posterity. And they'll be there all the time. If you want to go back and listen to any of them, they run about 10 minutes each. There's a few that are longer and a few that are shorter. But hopefully you've enjoyed these, and hopefully you'll go back and listen to me. Share them with your friends, please. Share them with your friends. It's a part of history that over the last 50 years, I'm glad I was a part of. And it's not over. I'm going to be doing this for quite some time, so I'm not going anywhere. But I just wanted to mark this milestone. I think one of the stories that when I was in Fresno, Kino in Fresno, the Coalinga earthquake. It was an earthquake that kind of didn't devastate a town, but it had its impact on the town of Coalinga, which was kind of out in the middle of nowhere in the San Joaquin Valley. And I remember about the third or fourth day in, I got a call from Washington, and they wanted to know, they heard there was an aftershock, and could I go out there? And I said, well, anybody dead? And they said, no, I don't think there's any injuries or anything. I said, well, no, not going to go out there. Not in the middle of the night. I got to get up and do the morning shift. And no, it's just not worth doing. If you want me to file a voicer or something like that and talk about it, I'll do that. But no. And they said, okay, because it really wasn't. The earthquake at that point for that town had pretty much, it was in the rebuilding stage, and it wasn't a news urgency at all anymore. Now, when I was in Bakersfield, one of the coolest things, I was in a newsroom, and it was between newscasts, because we did newscasts twice an hour, and then late morning we didn't do any, and then we prepared for the noon. Well, it was the day of the U.S. hockey team playing Russia in the Olympics and Lake Placid, and it was the Miracle on Ice. And we were watching the game. We had a TV in the newsroom, and the jock who was, I could see through the window next to me, was watching it as well through that glass. And we were waiting for that final moment. And then, do you believe in miracles? Yes, with Al Michaels' famous line. And we all just went nuts. We just went nuts in the newsroom. And we did a bulletin break-in. U.S. had beaten the Russians. Of course, we also had to mention that they still had to play Finland, and they beat Finland later on for the gold medal. But that was such a great moment. Now, when I was at UPI, when the fall of Ferdinand Marcos was taking place in the Philippines, my colleague Bob Fuss was preparing to go to the Philippines to deal with that in the people power movement of Cory Aquino, who was going to take over as the new president, and Marcos, who was going to be forced out. We dealt with a radio station in Manila. It was a Catholic radio station. And now this is the days you either had a touch-tone phone or a remote phone. And you didn't have a cell phone. You didn't have, had no computer to dial up the phone. And we had to try to get through to this radio station in Manila while there were planes and helicopters walking down the city, and troops were out, and they were trying to protect Marcos, and it wasn't happening. And it was crazy. Well, you can imagine trying to get through. The line was constantly busy because other people were using them as well for, to get updates on, from reporters there and what was going on. Because that was the eyes and ears, really, was the Catholic radio station for us. Well, we only had to dial about 13 numbers. You had the country code, the city code, the Manila code, and then the regular phone number. And it was like, and you dial these 15 numbers or whatever it was, and all of a sudden you're, because it was busy. You did it again. And I probably dialed at one point, before I got through, over 40 times. My finger was about ready to fall off because it was dialing the rotary phone. And that leads me to the technology. I remember the first cell phone. I have it, and I didn't pull it out, but it was about this big before it opened as a flip phone. And for those of you listening on the podcast, I'm talking probably 10 inches, 8 inches, probably closer to 8 inches. And then it flipped open and was almost a foot. And it was just big. And it had a little plastic antenna, and the service was not very good. It was 90 cents a minute to call, and the service was not good at all. And the quality was just terrible. But, it worked. And so that was our first cell phones. And then we had, of course, the dial phones. And at that time, we were using audio tape. And tape that we had to cut up and blade instead of the computer where you just got to slash, bip, bip, and do a couple of clicks. And of course, we used carts at that time to play our sound. And a cart was about a 4x6 or 3x6 plastic cartridge that had reel-to-reel tape or had tape in it. And you'd put that in the machine and you'd punch a button and would play whatever sound. So it made it much more difficult than today, of course, when you can just feed stuff in off your cell phone. And then you had to blade cut it, and which meant you had to use a razor blade to cut the tape, and then use a little piece of tape to put over join the two pieces of tape. And I had a guy in Fresno, and the heads on the tape were, which is where you didn't mark it because there was a thumb guide, and that thumb guide would be exactly as to where you needed to cut the tape, where it was on the head, the tape head. And those tape heads were about $1,200 back then. I'm talking in the 80s, so they're very expensive. I had a guy who not only took a grease pencil and marked on the heads, which was something you shouldn't do. We did it sometimes, but he took a razor blade and cut it on the head, damaged the heads, and of course the tape recorder became useless. And it was like, I went through the roof. Absolutely. It's a guy who should know better. And I went through the roof, and I had to tell the engineers, and he didn't last too long after that, unfortunately. The other thing, if you're in radio or in news in general, I'll leave it at that. In news in general, one of the things you have to get used to is dead bodies. If you've never seen a dead body before, it can be disturbing. But I'll be honest with you, you get used to it. You really do. One incident, I had a guy working for me by the name of Lee, and it was in Bakersfield. And I was doing the morning newscast, and Lee came in the afternoon. And we had a double fatal car accident out on one of the highways outside of Bakersfield, one of the smaller highways that joined Highway 99 with the 5 freeway. And it was a kind of a straight road, but it had a lot of dips, up and down, up and down, up and down. And of course, the sun rises at the east, and this truck driver was going from west to east and decided he needed to make a U-turn in the middle of the road. And while he was halfway there, it was a car with 2 gentlemen in it. And they were coming at probably 50, 60 miles an hour into the sun. And they didn't see the truck until it was too late. And they went right into the trailer and just sheared off the top of the car. And of course, they were both decapitated. And I didn't know they were decapitated. It was a major thoroughfare, so we needed to cover it right away, get somebody out there. So I called Lee at home, got him up, and I said, go out there and just file me some stories. He went out, did his job, it was fine. Came back to bring in more tape about an hour later. And he looked green to the gills, and it was just like, I said, Lee, you okay? And he goes, Bob, I got out there, and the cops were out there, but they hadn't, coroner or nobody had been out there to cover the bodies. They were just kind of, and I said, oh, your first DBs, huh, Lee? He goes, he ran into the bathroom and threw up. And he was fine after that. But, it's one of those things when you're in news, if your first one is always kind of tragic. I remember seeing young men's bodies in a field after a gang shootout, and they were still there. Coroner hadn't been there, covered. And that's part of what you do. And you get used to it. You have to. If you can't, you don't belong in the news industry. Uh, my first major star interview was a country singer by the name of Wynn Stewart when I was at K-Not in Prescott. And I was supposed to interview Johnny Western, which would have been a treat because Johnny Western was one of my favorites because he sang the lead song for the Western TV series Paladin, which I loved, which was Have Gun Will Travel. And I was supposed to interview him. At the last minute, my boss chose to interview him himself and left me out of the loop. He did give me Wynn Stewart to interview. Now, Wynn Stewart's country singer, had a big song called It's Such a Pretty World Today. That was his big hit. But I didn't know anything about him except I knew that song vaguely. And he came in and he sat down, and before the interview, and I'm on the air, I'm going to interview him live on the air. I looked at him, I said, Mr. Stewart, I have to apologize. I'm not a huge fan of country music and I don't know much about you. He goes, don't worry about it, no big deal. Because he was appearing at the Palomino Club later that night, and which in town was a big country club. And so he says, you got any albums? And I said, yeah. So I found one of his albums. He pulled out a song called You Just Can't Win, Stewart. And so we played that as the intro, and it was kind of fun, and we got into it. We did the interview, and everything was going fine. And, not knowing much about his background, I said, why don't you talk about your family, your wife, kids? You got a wife and kids? And he goes, no. It was like dead silence. I said, oh, crap, where do I go now? And he goes, but I got a secretary, though. And we all laughed, and everything was fine. And then we went on and did the interview. And he really saved me at that point. The day Ronald Reagan took office, the inauguration, the day before that, the hostages, 444 days of the hostages being held in Iran, we report on daily, and it had been over a year that they'd been held, and we report daily on the story. But we tried to get some sort of sense of what was going on as Reagan was taking office, because there was going to be a big change from Jimmy Carter. And I called from Bakersfield, California. I got a number for a business at the airport in Tehran, and I got a guy on who spoke English, and he worked for one of the airlines there. And here we were, a little radio station in Bakersfield, California, working on this major story, and I got this great interview we did live on the air with this guy from Tehran who was challenging us as Americans to, get these people out of here. You've been, ruined our country and that kind of stuff, and just get them out of here. And it was a really good interview. It probably lasted 5 minutes, and but it was really good. We used parts of it over the next couple of days, and of course, when next thing we knew, the hostages were flying out as Reagan was being sworn in, and they cleared airspace right at that time, and he mentioned that. So that was a really kind of cool thing. Reagan seemed to play a lot, mainly because the 80s, and I was working for a major news network at the time. I got to be in a pool, a radio pool, with basically it was a TV tribute. They called it a salute to Dutch Reagan. Of course, during his Hollywood days, Ronald Reagan was known as Dutch, and now he was president. And they did this mock dinner over at, I believe it was Paramount. And they flew us in helicopters from Santa Monica Airport to the Paramount site, and these military helicopters, whole press corps, anyway, the pool people, and, the president and Marine One, and landed at Paramount, went into the studio, and here we are in this mock setting where all these Hollywood stars are there. Frank Sinatra and just Vin Scully was there, and all these people were there. And they had us sitting at tables. We had to wear tuxes. That was part of the deal. We didn't do anything. We were just there in case, something happened and something bad happened. And then that was our job, to just start doing sceners and, recording everything we could. And nothing happened, of course. And sitting at our table were a couple of Secret Service agents, and they were all throughout the tables and throughout the event. And before Reagan spoke, Frank Sinatra introduced Vin Scully. Frank Sinatra got up and spoke. And this is not long after Tommy Lasorda in the World Series, or playoffs as it was, chose to pitch to Jack Clark. Jack Clark hit a home run, beat the Dodgers, and that was that. So Frank Sinatra is wrapping up, and he introduces Vin Scully as the radio and TV announcer for the Angels, not the Dodgers. And it's Sinatra. I mean, what are you going to say? You know, and so Scully gets up there, and nobody laughed. Nobody said anything. Nobody made a comment. Um, Scully got up there, and he said that, well, there you go. You see that Tommy Lasorda chooses to pitch to Jack Clark, and I get traded to the Angels. And everybody broke up, and everything was fine. Well, that never made the show. They cut out the Sinatra introduction and the Vin Scully thing, but it was funny. The John DeLorean trial I got to cover, and the thing I remember most about that is government did overreach, real overreach. Came out in the last part of testimony in the trial, and part of it in closing arguments too, is that his lawyers made the case that the FBI had gotten John DeLorean to agree to deal $24 million in drugs to save his failing DeLorean car company. DeLorean, they had a final meeting to set this thing up, and DeLorean tried to back out. He said, no, I don't want to do this. I think it's a bad idea. I don't want to do it. The FBI enticed him, added more stuff to keep him in the deal. They had spent so much time on this deal, setting up John DeLorean and working out this thing. They were going to convict him, and they wanted that conviction. They wanted to trap him. He wanted out. He didn't want anything to do with it. They kept throwing more at him to try to make the deal better, and he went along with it. Entrapment. Classic case of entrapment. And what it came down to, that was the key in that case. The government overreached. And that is when you sit there and say, how can you trust government? How can you trust law enforcement when this is what happened? When John DeLorean was no saint. He was guilty of trying to do this, but he wasn't guilty of doing it until he got enticed and entrapped by the FBI. So that was an interesting case. One of the fun things I got to do, our boss in Washington at UPI got fired, Lou Geiserman, and they were going to have a party back there. Bob Fuss and I could not go, and we're in LA. They were going to have a goodbye party for Lou. So everybody was contributing funny sound and that kind of stuff. And Bob did this thing with Casablanca, how the troubles of, because he loved the movie Casablanca, how the troubles of three little people in this world don't amount to a hill of beans, right? So Lou loved man on the street interviews, just loved it, always wanted it. Bob hated it. I liked it. I just had fun doing it. So I decided I would go down on the street with my microphone, but no UPI flag and my tape recorder, and just stop people downtown Los Angeles. We were right across the street from the LA Times at the 2nd and Broadway. I would stand there on the corner and just interview people and say, did you know Lou Geiserman got fired? What are your thoughts? And of course, none of these people knew who Lou Geiserman was, but they all faked it. Every one of them, maybe with the exception of one. I think one person said, who's Lou Geiserman? Several people said, oh man, that's really bad. I don't think he deserved it. And all these hits. And finally, the last person I interviewed, where two people came walking to me, and one was a Mexican guy who didn't speak English, and the other guy did. And the one guy who spoke English gave me an answer, and I put the microphone in front of the other guy, and he reeled off this answer in Spanish. And I asked the other guy to translate. He goes, well, he says, maybe it was discrimination or something. And that was how we ended it. And it was just, Lou loved it. I put together this montage of like 3 minutes. Lou loved it. It was classic. And it was like, and it just showed that you put a microphone in front of people, a lot of them, if they don't even know what you're asking or whatever, they'll give an answer like they know what you're talking about. And it was fortunate. I did not carry the mic flag with me as far as UPI radio. I did it incognito. So none of those people know about what happened after that, but that was kind of funny. One of the things that I got to do, the Oscars. I think I did 8 Oscars. uh, eight, seven, 6 or 8 Grammy awards and some Emmy awards. And every year, those are the 3 shows, and American Music Awards, and we got to meet a lot of people, and those were fun. I mean, the other award shows, the Golden Globes too, those were all kind of fun. But the Oscars was really something special. Problem was with the Oscars, they would put us backstage in little dinky tables, and we had to really share with everybody. We had to file every half hour live, and it was backstage, so you had room noise, and that was okay because you got this feeling of reality. And of course, the red carpet, and you went out there and you did interviews. But the thing about the Oscars, it was just so much fun, except you had to wear a tuxedo, and women had to wear ball gowns or something along that line. But men had to wear tuxedos, and I really objected to that because we were backstage. We literally were wearing tuxedos and had porta potties. Seriously, porta potties. And the women had ball gowns and porta potties. And the men had tuxedos and porta potties. You know what that's like? It's horrible. It's stupid. It really is. But anyway, so I really objected. But every day, every time we walked in for that show, there was a woman there who was really a pain in the butt, who inspected you. And if you were not wearing a tuxedo, you were not allowed in. That was bar none. Didn't matter who you were. So each year, after the first year I wore the black tuxedo, I rented a tux. I didn't own one. I would go to Sears, and for $35, I would rent a tux. And I would rent a different color every year. Second year, I wore a gray one. Third year, I wore a blue one. And one year, I rented one that was chocolate brown. It was the most awful looking tuxedo ever. It was disgusting. And what I would do is I'd wear my hat, which I always wear, and I would wear a band that matched on the hat that matched the color of the tuxedo. And I got to the back there, and I walked in, and she inspected me, and she looked me up and down, and just kind of stared at me, and then said, "Well, that's an interesting tuxedo." I said, "But it's a tuxedo." And she goes, "Yeah, go ahead in." She hated me. I'm sure she did, but that was my rebellious streak. But the thing about the award shows, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but let me come back to that. One of the earthquakes that I chose to make a deal about to cover was in Italy, in central Italy. And my family is from central Italy, and my mother's family is from northern Italy. Well, this earthquake took place in the region where I had gone more than once, and I have extremely great friends there. My best friend in all the world when it comes to family and friends. My best friend here, obviously growing up, is Marty Aproyan. That's Marty and I is my dear friend. Mario was another dear friend, and he lived in Potenza in central Italy, and the earthquake happened there. And it destroyed a lot of stuff. And they'd had many earthquakes there. And I got the call. I called him on the phone, and I said, "Mario, describe to me what happened." And he did, and it was great. And then he said, "You're going to make me famous." And I said, "Yes, I'm going to make you famous." And we put it out on the radio. And I've looked for that tape. I know I've got it here somewhere. And his daughters have always wanted to hear it. I'm going to find it. Now that we can do that digitally, I can send that to them. Where I want to wrap this up is the fact that I got to share some of my radio career with my kids, my oldest son, Bobby, my daughter, Julia, and my youngest son, Jamie, and who goes by James. And one of the things that I got to do at UPI, especially, I was on the media list, the screening list for all the movies, because we covered Hollywood. And so I would get screeners 2-3 times a week. I could not ever go that much, but if there was a movie I really wanted to see, we would go and be able to go see it, and with other reporters and industry people at a screening in Hollywood. And I remember Bobby, was older, and we went to more movies than with the other 2 kids. there were more adult films, not adult films, but more mature films. And he was getting to that age where he could understand that. And there were world affairs, movies from Israel, just shoot 'em up movies, RoboCop, for instance, and things like that. And Bobby and I went to, we went to quite a few. And Julie and I, the one I remember the most was Little Mermaid. And I cherish that moment because not only did I get to go with my beloved daughter, but we got to, they gave us some swag, which she got to have. And I don't remember what it is, but it was a little swag. But it was just great. And I had a great night. It was sort of a date night with my daughter. And it was just wonderful. And I'll never forget that night. And then the night I'll never forget is the one with Jamie. We went to see All Dogs Go to Heaven. And I remember him saying, he loved it when he was there, but I remember him saying, because he started hearing about reviews about it was getting panned. And even at his age, he kept saying, my movie wasn't any good. I didn't get to go to a good movie. And I said, yeah, you did. We tried to soothe it out. He goes, my movie sucked. But it turned out to be a classic, children's film. And but I remember that. But probably the most touching moment with my kids in all of that was we're in Fresno, and I had a company car, a news car, and we're driving around one weekend, and had the roof that came off, and Bobby and Julie were sitting in the back seat, and that would have been 1981, 82, I guess. So Bobby would have been about 4 or 5, and Julia would have been about 2 or 3. And they were sitting in the back, and I never really thought they got onto the news thing, but I guess through osmosis you do. And they were sitting in the back seat, and they were talking. And they were talking in broadcast voices. And Bobby said, yes, it's looking out the window now. It is raining gorillas all over the place. It's raining gorillas. Now back to you, John. It was one of those moments. It was like, and Julie was with him, just the two of them were together, and they were just kind of conversing back and forth, and then did the raining gorillas down out of the sky. And now back to you, John. And that is one moment I'll never forget. It's just, the family connections that you have in your career, and the things that you never know are happening, or you kind of figure are happening. And that was just one of those nice moments. And I got a lot more stories, and maybe we'll do this again sometime. But moving forward, I'm going to have a lot more stories because I'm not done. I'm not anywhere near done in this career. So, and even though I'm transitioning into filmmaking and podcasting and being an author, of which I've written at this point 13 books and produced 4 short films and shot a documentary on the 1971 earthquake in Sylmar. I was a senior at Sylmar High School at that time. And so we got to interview a lot of friends and people that we didn't know as well to do that. And it's at the distributors now. So I hope you enjoy this month. Please go back and listen to the ones you haven't listened to, and feel free to send me an email at brillpro@prodigy.net. That's BRILLPRO @prodigy.net. Send me an email and tell me if you liked it or you didn't, or even like it on the site that you're listening to it or watching it on. Thanks again. I appreciate it. We'll see you next time.